Thanks to the Center for Fiction for having me here tonight. I'm going to talk about setting and the importance it plays for me as a writer. And I've put together a PowerPoint. Now, I've never in my life done a PowerPoint presentation before. So if at any point we run into technical glitches, I will be ditching the PowerPoint and proceeding nonetheless. I have a plan B. I think I discovered from my first novel, Lives of the Saints, that setting is sort of a backbone of writing. For me, I started out to write a novel that was going to have a short prologue in it that was set in a small mountain village in Italy in the early 1960s. And I figured I had to know the village fairly well to write about it, so I did research on it. My parents had come from villages like that, so I had access to some personal history. I went to the library, took books out, and so on, trying to make sure that I got the village right. And as I did that, I found the village taking on a kind of life of its own. And what I had started out writing as a prologue quickly became a novel in itself, and my first novel. And that the village in that story is really like the main character of the story. With my fourth novel called Testament, it's sort of a fictional reimagining the life of Jesus. I had a similar kind of experience. I started writing the book and found that my mind kept going to the kind of stereotypical images that we get from all the Hollywood movies we've seen of the story of Jesus and all the historical novels we read. And I was finding it very hard to get out of that mindset until I went to Israel and to some of the surrounding areas, to Jordan and the Sinai. And that trip really sort of galvanized my understanding of my characters and of my story. It was really after that trip that the novel took off for me, and I felt that I could write it. Understanding the landscape that those characters had actually moved in. I think in order for characters to be as fully what they are, they have to be situated in some kind of an ecosystem that we can understand them within, that connects them to the larger world and to other characters, and that forms a kind of tissue of relations as it would in any kind of natural ecosystem. When I came to write my novel, The Origin of Species, after having thought about this book for quite a while, probably for about 20 years by the time I actually came to write it, and I think one of the reasons it took me so long to get around to it was because it's always dangerous to start a novel from an idea. I always tell my students to avoid doing that because then you spend the first 5 drafts sort of stripping away all the ideological baggage so that the characters actually have some room to breathe. And I didn't really have, I guess, a character or situation that could move the idea that I had in mind forward. But when I finally came up with the story that I wanted to do, I realized that I would have to find some way to animate the characters' interest in evolution and evolutionary theory as a kind of motive force within the book. The story I came up with was of a doctoral student in Montreal who's trying to write an evolutionary theory of narrative, but who's been formed by this experience from the past, by a visit that he made to the Galapagos Islands that had a kind of formative influence on him, much as Darwin's own trip to the Galapagos Islands as a young man had formed him. So at a certain point I figured I had to travel there if I was going to be able to understand that environment with the kind of complexity I would need in order to bring it to life in the novel. Well, I was speaking to Kristen earlier. Apparently now on Google Earth, you can do a sort of street view of the Galapagos Islands, do the entire tour online. I'm not sure you get quite the same effect as actually being there. Now it's quite, I mean, it was quite expensive to get to the Galapagos Islands, so I was taking a risk in going there. I didn't really know what I was looking for. I didn't know what I wanted my character to find or what it was that was going to be transformative for him. But I paid my money. I got on a plane. I went down there, and took my chances. Now, Darwin himself, when he'd gone there, had gone as a sort of gentleman companion aboard a ship called the HMS Beagle. He'd been his father wanted him to be a doctor and had sent him to the University of Edinburgh, which is where he went to be a doctor in those days. This was in the days before anesthesia, so Darwin didn't take very well medicine and flunked out. And what happened when he flunked out of medicine was he went to Cambridge, which was a kind of finishing school for gentlemen. So he spent the next years there at Cambridge collecting beetles and riding horses. And then he signed on for this trip around the world as a way of broadening his horizons. At that point he was an amateur naturalist. And it was the specimens that he collected on the Galapagos Islands that ended up being crucial to his development of the theory of evolution. I'm not going to go into a lot of details, but it was his eventual observation that species were adapted to particular islands that was at the core of his theory of evolution by natural selection. That theory that animals and plants adapted themselves to their conditions. That strikes us as common sense today, but in his time it was a fairly radical notion. The going belief at the time, even in scientific circles, was that species had been created as they were by God at the moment of creation and didn't change. And anyone who said otherwise was speaking heresy and was subject to being ostracized from both the religious and scientific community. So when Darwin got this insight after his trip, he sat on it for 20 years. He was so terrified of what the backlash would be if he came up with this theory. He spent 20 years refining it and testing it and looking at it from every angle to make sure he got it right. And really only published because he got a letter one day from a colleague of his, Alfred Russel Wallace, who was poor and used to make his living sending specimens to richer people like Darwin. And he sent a letter to Darwin saying, "I've come up with this theory of evolution," which almost exactly mirrored Darwin's own. So at that point, Darwin figured he better get his word out there, and that was how the origin of species came to be. But it was although it took 20 years for him to come out with it, it was really the Galapagos that started, the seed in him that eventually led to the theory of evolution. So I figured I would get my character there to the Galapagos and have something happen to him that would have some kind of parallel to Darwin's own experience that could somehow account for the obsession that he subsequently develops for evolutionary theory. And as I say, I didn't know what that thing was going to be, and I didn't know much more about the Galapagos when I went there than my character did. I could probably have located it on a map. It's about 600 miles off the coast of Ecuador, and consists of, I can't remember how many, but 13 or 14 islands spread out over quite a distance, spread out over hundreds of miles. And when you go there on a tour, you basically sign onto a boat of varying sizes. Some are quite small, some are larger, and they take you around to various sites on various islands where you get a sort of cross-section view of the islands. And it's a very controlled kind of experience. It needs to be. It's a very protected ecological area. You can't just show up and wander around. And it's very volatile and susceptible to outside influences from people who might unwittingly, bring some new bug into the ecosystem that could completely devastate the environment. They have an ongoing battle there with goats who date back to the 17 and 1800s, when sometimes prisoners were left there and sometimes farmers who bred these goats. But there are large packs of feral goats now that wander some of the islands, destroying the landscape and destroying the habitat of some of the indigenous species. And at certain points, the Park Service was employing sharpshooters from Australia who would fly over with guns to shoot these goats down and try and kill them. So it's been an ongoing eradication program that's been going on for the past 20 or 30 years. Now my character, when he arrives at the Galapagos, imagines, as he's been told by someone he meets on the Inca Trail, that it's this sort of paradise on earth. He imagines it as this place where, the lion lies down with the lamb, and it's tropical and lush. And I had done some research on the Galapagos. I wasn't quite that uninformed, but I was still, I was pretty surprised when I arrived at how bleak a landscape it is. This is one of my first views of the islands. It's just after the airport, the bus that took us to the boat. It passes, actually, this is the site of an old U.S. military base. You can still sort of see some of the roads and foundations of some of the buildings. A lot of those buildings were taken down, and the wood was used to build buildings in some of the towns on the islands out of what was called baltra wood, because the wood had come from Baltra. But this kind of desolation was fairly typical of what you'd see on much of the islands, and particularly if you arrived there during the dry season, which I did. So the first misconception about the window was that this was going to be some kind of, tropical, lush tropical paradise. The second misconception that would go out the window was that this was some kind of pre-Lapsarian harmonic world where, all the creatures got along and everything was tame. And, we all hear about how sedate the animals are and how easy it is to approach them, and that's true. They don't have any innate fear of humans. But we quickly discovered there's a fair amount of brutality that goes on in the natural world there, as elsewhere. This is a masked booby, and I think you can see her sitting on an egg. The masked booby will lay 2 eggs, and what happens is that the first one to hatch will be fed, and then we'll wait around for the second one to be hatched. And as soon as the second one is hatched, it will kill it. That's its first mission in life. It begins its life with a fratricide. So the second egg is really just insurance for the parents. They can't afford to raise 2 children. And so it is the mission of the firstborn to kill the secondborn if by chance the secondborn should live. And it does that either by pecking it to death or simply chasing it out of the circle of the nest so it's picked off by predators, or ignored by the parents until it dies once it's outside the circle of the nest. So it quickly dispelled any notion that this was some idyllic, harmonic place. On our second day, we went to this is the nesting ground of the boobies. You can see these nests stretching for a mile off in the distance, and all those little circles are all nests. They're all masked boobies sitting there on their eggs, and it was a kind of strange contradiction that despite knowing that this brutal rivalry for survival goes on from the instant of birth. You look at a scene like this, it seems incredibly ordered and pacific. And we arrived there at shift change, which happens sort of in late afternoon. So all day long, one of the parents will sit on the nest, and the other parent's out fishing. And at a certain point, all the other spouses come home, and they change places. And there's this great honking that goes up at that point, and you can almost hear them saying, you know, what took you so long? I was sitting here all day. And you know, the one spouse takes over, and the other one flies off to get something to eat. And it's, you know, it feels like you're in an American suburb somewhere at the end of the workday, or you see all these little houses essentially set out like that, and all these birds sort of looking over their children and squawking and squabbling. So sort of everything that I saw in the Galapagos had that kind of sort of double edge to it. On the one hand, this implication of terrible brutality, and on the other of this very kind of ordered and almost sophisticated behavior. This is a picture of the mating dance of the Boobies. The Boobies do a very sophisticated mating dance where, you know, the male will dance around for the woman. He'll do this thing called sky pointing his beak up in the air. He'll make this very piercing kind of sound, like a song, and then he will bring little gifts to the woman. He will pick up a stone and put it in front of her, pick up a twig and put it in front of her, and it's almost like he's telling her a story, like he's putting metaphors in front of her. You know, the stone represents the children that we will have. The twig represents, you know, the food that I will bring you. It's like this happily ever after story that the Boobie has to tell his mate in order to get her to come along. So, you know, as I'm seeing these things, which were all new to me, you know, I'm starting to get a sense of what makes this place tick. This is the Rabida Island, where a lot of the sea lions hang out, and this is a harem of sea lions, of mothers and their pups. I think some of the mothers are feeding their children, and there will be one male who will sort of rule over this roost, maybe for several months, and he has, you know, complete rights over all these women and children. He may not be the father of all the children, but for those months, you know, he's the beach master, and he might go days or weeks without eating in order to make sure that he protects his beach, so that no rival will come in and chase him off. And it's, you know, it's pretty fatiguing. And the other males will wait until he's, you know, weakened by these weeks and months of vigilance, and when the moment's right, they'll come in, they'll attack him, and one of them will take over. And the conflicts are often quite bloody. But once you're chased off the beach, you go back to this place that they call the Bachelor Bar. So these are males who are no longer the beach masters, and they're sort of like the I don't know if you remember that cartoon of the wolf and the sheep, who used to, you know, they'd fight all day long, and at the end of the day they'd punch out and they'd be, you know, friends, and they'd come back to work the next day. Well, this is, you know, the males after work. You know, they're just hanging out at the Bachelor Bar, you know, gathering their resources, waiting for the moment when they can fight another day. I mean, if you can get close enough to these males, you can often see that some of them are quite scarred from all these battles they've had. Now, it's not that easy to get close to them, because they tend to think that you might be there to compete with them for their women. So you can see that we're some of us are beating eggs to retreat there, but you can sort of see on this one some of the evidence of the scarring that happens from those battles. But you also find that, you know, most of that kind of rivalry is is handled in a very efficient way. You know, it never goes to the point of destruction. It's like you go as far as you need to change the beach master so that you have a new fresh one. In the case of the tortoises, many species of tortoise handle their male rivalry battles just by raising their necks. Whoever can raise their head the highest is the winner. There's no blood, there's no contact. It's just a matter of getting your head up there. So what I was discovering is that, you know, what makes the Galapagos so interesting is this, neither the brutality nor the calm, but the tremendous balance that exists amongst all these species. How each of them have found their own niche, which sometimes results in, you know, some weird evolutionary eccentricities. These are flightless cormorants. So they're birds who used to fly, but, you know, over the past you know, hundreds of thousands of years, they figured out that they can make a better living in the Galapagos swimming than flying. And you'll see them in the water, and they move as smoothly as sea lions, and they can't fly. And, you know, as their evolution continues, their wings are disappearing, and they're becoming more and more like these creatures. Oh, sorry. I think I've lost a slide. Anyway, there was the Galapagos penguins, which are the only species of equatorial penguins that live in a warm climate. No one's quite sure how they ended up there, and you see them on the rocks basking there, and you think, oh, they must be here on vacation, because they seem so out of place in this environment. But that's the kind of place the Galapagos is. It's full of these kinds of eccentricities, and you know, what makes it interesting to evolutionists is that it's not the sort of proliferation of strange species, but the limitation of species. The fact that there are so few factors on the islands, so few species of plants and animals, that you can see the interaction amongst all of them and chart them and plot them and see what happens when, you know, when there's some small change in the environment. You can immediately see the effect it has on other species. The other thing that makes it, you know, such a good lab for the study of evolution is that geologically these islands are quite new. I think the youngest of them is less than 1 million years old. The oldest is about 4 million years old. So what you're seeing on these islands, as I was coming to understand, is the beginning of life. You know, this is what the world looked like, you know, 3 billion years ago, when the first creepy half thing crawled up out of the water onto the land, and the first plants were, you know, setting out their tendrils. Well, you can get an idea of that by going to a place like the Galapagos. You know, one of the first things that has to happen is all this lava rock has to break down into soil. And here's one of the ways in which that happens. You see that little hollow in the rock. Well, you know, pebbles will get lodged in hollows like that, and the waves will come and knock the pebbles around, and that'll grind them down eventually into sand and dirt. So that's how you start getting the first little bits. Then plants come along. Oh, there's my penguins, yeah. I've lost control of my, okay. These plants are lavacanthus. I mean, they're probably, you know, quite old, but they don't get very big. But they're known as pioneer plants, and there were various species of pioneer plants, and in my novel, pioneer plants would end up playing a pretty important role. The pioneer plants are the first plants that establish themselves on the rock. They can exist with very little soil, and then their root systems then work to sort of further grind up the rock and create more soil. And over, you know, tens of thousands of years, you eventually get, you know, dirt that bigger plants could establish themselves in. So, you know, I was starting to get pretty excited once I started understanding these things. And we had very good guides. I mean, I wouldn't have understood if I hadn't had people telling me these things as we're going along. But, you know, I was getting to feel that this was a place where transformations could happen, where, you know, my character could have some kind of life-changing event. Now, I'd also gone there looking for Darwin's Ghost, and of course everything there is named after Darwin. You know, the first bay we went to was called Darwin's Bay, but Darwin had apparently never set foot in it. This was something that they called Darwin's Chair, otherwise known as Darwin's Toilet, but there's no evidence that Darwin actually went anywhere near it. But I did finally come to a place he'd actually set foot in. This is Tagus Cove on Isabel Island. And ships have been putting in there for hundreds of years. And in fact, there's graffiti on the rocks that goes back to the early 1800s that you can still read. And Charles Darwin stopped off there on September 30th, 1835, and he went up to a place that's now called Darwins Lake. And he was quite thirsty. He ran down the lake hoping to get I mean, this picture doesn't do it justice, but the water is this brilliant view. It's quite a beautiful sight. And he ran down hoping for a drink of water, but unfortunately it was salt. But, you know, there I was standing in the very place that Darwin had stood like about 170 years beforehand, and I was starting to get the thrill that I think I needed to move my character forward. I was fortunate enough to spend a few days at the end of my stay in Puerto Ayora, one of the towns on one of the main islands, talking to people at the Darwin Research Center there, including a guy named Godfrey Merlin, a wonderful name, who'd been there since the 70s. And he was this very sort of wizard-like figure, and he talked to me with this passion about what it had been like, in the early days, because back then, it was still possible to just arrive there and just go off and do things. It wasn't nearly as regulated as it is now, and backpackers would arrive and they would just, sign on with some fishermen who would take them around to the islands while they went out fishing and just feed them from the back of the boat. He described what it was like, to be there and to just go out there and just to see the bare bones of evolution happening in front of your eyes and the excitement of that. And I think he, more than anyone, sort of gave me the sense I needed to start my character out and to start seeing this place as this kind of living entity that could really take on its own life in the novel. My character's name, which I'd already chosen by then, was Alex. And as I was leaving Puerto Ayora, I saw on a wall some graffiti that said Alex was here. It was like the town was sending me a message that yes, my $5,000 had not been wasted on this trip.